So my guest on Grail Country today is Father Brian Foos, the vicar of St. Andrew's Church in Chester,
Foos.
California.
Foos.
Oh, sorry, Foos. That's right. And I messed that up, even though I talked to him on the phone yesterday. So my apologies. It's Father Brian Foos, I almost said director, the vicar of St. Andrew's Church in Chester, California, and as well as the head of a new venture, St. Andrew's College, and the headmaster of St. Andrew's Academy. So I made Father Foos's acquaintance because my son is actually interested in attending his brand new micro college, and we had a phone conversation yesterday. I happened to mention today that I have a YouTube channel that mostly deals with theology, and I thought that my audience might be interested in learning about his college. So my first question for you, Father Foos, is why a college and why now?
It's a big question. Let me start with why a college. When we founded St. Andrew's Academy 23 years ago, a college was in the back of the mind of those of us that founded it. Not very forefront, but just way back on the back burner. And as we moved forward and educated, 23 years worth of students, particularly as we got into high school, and we're watching high school students graduate and try to choose a college, we've seen statistically, anecdotally, in even those last 20 plus years, that colleges have tended to be somewhat of a dangerous place for Christian students. This kind of commonplace to understand that, oh yeah, your Christian kid grows up in the church and then goes to college and loses their faith. Obviously, that's not overall, but there's enough of that happening that there is concern in the culture, in the Christian culture anyways. Perhaps not enough concern, because I keep seeing this happen over and over and over again. So one of the emphases for St. Andrew's Academy over the years was, all right, guys, you're going to face some tough situations when you land at college. You're going to deal with professors that not only don't agree with you, but want you to stop having a faith. I remember even back in my college days that professors were not always friendly towards my Christian faith. Some were antagonistic, probably not most, but it became worse and worse as the years went by. I think it's arguable. So my own children are graduating right now, last few years coming up. And as I've been watching the culture, listening, trying to take the pulse as best as I can with my colleagues, with friends who are engaged in the cultural moment. These last 3-4 months in particular, I've been heavy concentration in the last year, asking the questions of what's going on there. And I think my conclusion is, well, it's written in a letter that's posted to the college Facebook site right now. I think we're in a cultural moment that is another one of these shifts, another change, that the world that I grew up in has ceased to exist for 30 years. The world, though, that my own children are graduating into as adults is not even remotely the same as 10 years ago. And that's when it kind of hit me that even 10 years ago, my graduates were entering a very different place than my graduates today do. And we've been pushing strongly, maybe is not the right, well, in the back of our mind for the last 8 years, maybe 10 years, we're saying, look, we've got to get this moving. Our graduates of our academy would head out and do really well generally. I mean, not everyone, not all the time. And we realized, we're teaching to a pretty high level. We need to get our students some dual enrollment credits. And so as we pursued that for these last numbers of years, it turns out that the easiest way for us to do that at St. Andrew's Academy is just to start a college so that our juniors and seniors are enrolled in the college as well as the high school and earn those college credits. So it seems to me that the time is now, that the church really, I mean, the culture is wild. I mean, by any stretch of anyone over 40 years old, the culture has gone crazy. Agree or disagree with that point or the other point, there's been a lot of change. I would say that Christianity is not being seen as a friend. So people of faith are being challenged to not hold their faith publicly, to not bring their faith with them. So though I've seen the need for a classically oriented college for decades, I see it is just almost come to this boiling point in these last couple of years. So as by God's grace, as things maneuvered to open these doors and we were able to walk through and get this college up and running, it seems like the time has never been more perfect to have an answer to what's going on in the culture. So that was why a college, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was also why now.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So what do you think, if you could put a descriptor or a name on this period that's ending, and kind of name what's so different from, say, like in 1989, when I was a senior in high school and I read Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind and decided, okay, I'm going to Great Books College, that's it. Like, what has changed so much between then and now that makes that need maybe greater than it was? And could you put an adjective on what you would call that change?
Yeah, I don't know that I can do the latter. I'm flummoxed myself with everything going on. In fact, I've had dialogue for these last 3 months in particular, trying to bring down to earth and verbalize the concerns that I've had and what I've, I'm not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. I describe myself as a slow plodding scholar. At all.
I call myself a redneck who reads.
Well, you should come visit our neck of the woods. There's plenty of
yeah.
What has changed? Well, the sexual revolution of the 60s and the early 70s has ripened and come to fruition, and that might be the only thing coming to fruition from that culture. The culture and look, I've been working for 30 plus years with young people, generally middle school through college, but I've had grammar school students as well. Just my wife, who's kind of our lead grammar school director, says, yeah, stay out of the grammar school classroom, you don't know what you're doing. But as I watch these middle schoolers and high schoolers over the years and the college students, the errors of the sexual revolution come to fruition has shown me that the children always are suffering. The children face the brunt of everything. And now we're experimenting on gender transition on little kids. We're basically making sure to introduce, depending on where you are, the ideology of the LGBTQ world, making sure our kindergartners are well developed in this ideology. I think that's a quick transition. Mind you, I get there's a debate, and I get that we can have a discussion. I have friends who are in that camp in one place or another. But I think that we are being careless, reckless, and dangerous with our children, and then our young teenagers and our older teenagers and our college students. And I'm seeing just a completely different world. I talked to some of my recent graduates and they're like, oh no, the world's completely different. It's not anything like what you knew. I'm like, well, I get that, but they help me get that in the little details. And well, you know, people would be offended if you said that. I'm like, well, but that was perfectly polite. I said, I disagree with you. And yeah, but you can't say that.
Right. Yeah.
So there's, I'm not even talking about being politically correct.
Right.
I'm talking about
You're talking about things that would have been considered completely normal by absolutely everybody 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that, like, wow. And then of course, me being a little bit older than my teenagers, and my students and college students, they're always looking at me and say, wow, you're really out of it. But then I'm talking to people in the 40s and 50s range who I think, I don't want to be rude, but I think clueless might be the word. Like many parents have no idea. I mean, they haven't 20 years of what their kids are going to face in college. But now I'm seeing Christian kids drop like flies in high school.
Right.
Not just going off to college, but the parents are going, what happened? You're in my house. How did this happen? So yeah, it's wild. I don't have any names. I'm still going, what is going on at some level?
Right.
Myself.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, to not have an answer. I was listening to a podcast today with John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pajot, who have both been on this channel. Jonathan Pajot is an Orthodox icon carver and a symbolist who has a fairly popular YouTube channel. And Dr. John Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist who has done a lot of work on what exactly is the nature of this meaning crisis that our culture seems to be going through. And in that conversation, one of the things that they were pointing toward is that we seem to have come upon this definition of freedom that is no limits on desire, which is why I think you're absolutely correct in pointing toward the sexual revolution as kind of like the roots of this. But that's just expanded and blossomed far beyond that.
Obviously, intellectually, the roots go back further, but culturally, I think we can see that as a big marker, and that the fruits of that are still working themselves out in negative ways for our culture, for our children and our young people. I think I'm absolutely no scientist and barely cognitive myself most of the time, but I think that part of the answer to that question that you guys discussed that I haven't seen or heard has to do with language and the way in which the deconstructive moment of the late 20th century debilitated language. Right at the time as we start to see all these new versions of, say, the Book of Common Prayer and new translations of the scriptures, and it seems to me like the silliest thing, like the last thing that we should be trying to do is come up with new versions of anything that has to do with language, because we've pretty much deconstructed language in the late 20th century so that it's meaningless. I sat there in a graduate class in literature and English, and we had the debate that language has no meaning. And I'm thinking, so can I leave now? What are we doing here if language has meaning? So
we've lost all sense of that there's such a thing as intellectual intuition. Like we've lost all understanding of that. So which keeps us from being able to take what are properly understood as first principles into account.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely existential world, and just bring your own baggage to it and make it up as you go.
Right.
Which is why the kind of education that we've been doing for a couple decades is seen as really weird.
Right.
Well, what are you doing? What you're having a discussion about what this text means? Doesn't everyone just bring their own meaning to it, or
Right.
derive their own meaning from it in their own way? And it's complicated, because it's like, well, yes, everyone does bring their own stuff to it, their own baggage, their own experience, and yes, everyone does have a different application in their life, because you went through these series of events. This text is going to impact you differently, and you might learn something completely different than what I might learn coming at it from my perspective. But that whole idea of the law of non-contradiction has disappeared. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you say this text means, black, and I say it means white, and it's either one or the other, or both are wrong and it means gray. But we've seemed to have lost this idea that no, there are bad readings of a text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's just gone. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember going to my first Christian teachers get together conference, and I remember sitting in a couple of these classes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you've just bought everything the world has been saying since the 70s and through the 80s and into the 90s, hook, line, and sinker, even though it doesn't mesh with any scriptural foundations or church teachings at all.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course then I complained about and found myself teaching a course at the next conference. And I think that, if I remember correctly, the title was something like sex, rock and roll, lies, whatever, some little list. Why the classics should be A, taught, B, ignored, C, censored. And and boy, did I have a crowd of people. I went, oh my gosh, what? Because this is at that time, this was like the wrestling match that was going on in the Christian colleges.
Right.
I mean, I had a couple girls at a Christian college that shall remain unnamed came up to me afterwards, said, everything you said is exactly the opposite of what I hear in class every day. And I'm an English student.
Yeah. Right. So what would you, that's great. I'm glad you bring that up. What would you say to parents whose like first reaction is like, but aren't there already plenty of Christian colleges out there? I mean, we have so many of them. What would you say to a parent who was considering your little college for their child, who said that to you?
I would say that there are a number of Christian colleges. For instance, you might look at Princeton, Harvard, or Yale. But no one thinks of those as Christian colleges anymore, do they?
No.
But that's how they were founded. And a big chunk of what we think of as the Christian colleges out there have been around for about 100 years, give or take, 20, 30, even 50 years. Some are quite old. And I would argue that you have to be very choosy, that many of these colleges have adopted the culture around them. And you can look at some of the highly considered conservative evangelical colleges that have really strong Bible departments, and you pick your tradition, whatever it is, and boy, you're not going to find a teacher within that Bible department at that Christian college that isn't going to be right down the line on these, really conservative Baptist or, Presbyterian or whatever it is in their history and their tradition. But our Bible department is solid. according to their list of what solid means. My challenge is always, I'll tell a student, go talk to an English professor. In fact, I visited a university with one of my students to see about attending them. And, you know, he had the things he wanted to see. That's great, but I have a few things. So the first thing was, I want to talk with one of the English professors. We walked out of there and I said, no way at all. That guy has no concept of what an English degree should be about. If you were to put C.S. Lewis, an English professor, next to him, they would be on opposite sides of the planet, and they're not even speaking the same language. And that was at a highly regarded Christian university. So another situation, I had a student talking to me during the summer back from a very conservative, you know, more or less Baptist evangelical college, where anything outside of the narrow band of what that theology was, that teacher would have been lynched. But the English teacher was off the map. Truth as an objective reality was not a part of anything he taught. Relativism was in, existential whatever. And so I'm like, I get that the Bible departments, they figured out how to keep them clean according to their standards. But they're letting the devil in the back door all over the place in English departments, humanities, history.
Right. And what percentage of their students are actually going to be, you know, biblical studies majors?
Very few. Yeah.
Right.
So this girl I was talking with lost her faith. She's no longer in the church, which is unfortunately all too common an issue.
Even at Christian colleges.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, back 30 years ago, family member went to one of the big evangelical colleges and lost his faith in the process, as did his wife. So the question is, look at the school, don't look at the Bible department. And honestly, you got to dig a little, because every Christian school is going to put forward the best face. And they're going to say, look at us having the joy of Jesus, tripsing along, having fun, enjoying college life, enjoying the local amenities or whatever it is, and learning and growing our faith. I just don't see it. And I think it's not very hard to go ask people and find a lot of people that would agree with that.
Do you think parents should pay more attention to what the actual curriculum is when making these decisions? Would you think that that's probably a good indicator?
Yes, but the curriculum is all designed to show well. What they need to do is surprise a teacher and sit in on a class, or talk with graduates and say, what was your experience? But the parents have to educate themselves and say, what are the right questions? Well, the questions are, well, I mean, how did this major that you studied, how was the gospel, how was the church, how was the scriptures talked about, integrated in? Was it look at what the curriculum is made of. We have followed in America for the last 100+ years, somewhere in the mid 1850s, the German model came across, and sort of the integrated curricular approach became all spread out. And most graduates today have no idea how the classes they took are supposed to integrate. Well, they don't. That's why they don't understand. Right. So one of the things we've done at St. Andrews, we're a single degree micro college. It's a humanities degree, classic liberal arts. And we've attempted to integrate everything, that everything fits. So in some sense, we've really looked back at the medieval model and said, how can we be like that? But, with laptops and iPads. And so there's this very strange mix. And we've been doing this, at the Academy for 20 plus years. And it's definitely old school Socratic discussion oriented. It's not that there's never a lecture given. Quite often students need input. And I would probably have little arguments with some different classical schools that push the Socratic to the outer edge, where
Like my alma mater.
perhaps I don't know enough about it, so that's fair. But there's some other schools out there I know a little bit more, and some of them talk like that. But when you sit down on a class, you're like, no, this teacher, not unlike Socrates, has a goal, and they're heading in a certain direction. And
That's definitely the case at Thomas Aquinas, without a doubt. It's not like, well, I can actually give you I've been to both Evergreen and Thomas Aquinas College. So that's the perfect point and counterpoint, because both schools are dedicated to the Socratic method. But at Evergreen, like the professors will let things go like way, way off track.
Right.
And at Thomas Aquinas, that is definitely not the case. So
yeah,
it's much more subtly directed in a very Socratic way.
Right. And that's what Socrates was doing.
Right.
And so, my students for years have said, oh yeah, we can get Father Foos on a rabbit trail, no problem. And usually by the time they're seniors or the graduates, said, well, you've seen me redirect the conversation when it needs to be redirected. What you don't understand is that pretty much 90% of every rabbit trail is worthwhile discussion. It may not be right on topic, but it's there. And I told him, I said, and remember, what do you need to know on the test? Anything that's been discussed in the class. So if you fell asleep during that, you might miss that question.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Did I answer the last question? I'm sorry. I get off on a rabbit trail quite easily.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, well, but yeah. What should the parents be looking at? So definitely, I would say 20 to 30 years ago, I was suspect of much of Christian college education. And I'll leave it at that. Today, that suspicion goes quite a bit further, depending on the school. And there's not that there aren't good schools out there. The other thing that I would say is that, first of all, 2025 is the big demographic drop. And I believe it's 15 to 20% loss in high school, graduating high school seniors. And every college admissions department is very well aware of this, and they're panicked. Because most colleges, private liberal arts, not state, that's a whole different category, but these private schools, private Christian schools, have tended to overbuild, have tried to compete with the school down the street that has more money. And so their tuition has gone up and up and up. It's a bit of a game. Every college has a bottom line that 80 to 90% of their students need to pay this much money for us to survive. And if you happen to be in the upper middle class or even higher, you're going to pay the full tuition of $65,000, $70,000. But the number probably is somewhere, I'm guessing, and talking with college administrators who will actually answer my questions. I said, you're looking at what, 28 to 30,000, something like that is like the drop dead. Everyone's got to pay this. And then that leaves a little bit of room to drop down for the kid who's really talented, but has no financial means. So I've seen some of my students get a deal at a good private Roman Catholic, upper end evangelical or traditional, private liberal arts school, down as low as even 15. But you know, they're not giving that to many people.
Right.
And this one I'm thinking of, top in his class, male, going into philology. I talked with the guy, the counselor. I said, how many philology majors do you have in every class? Oh, 4 or 5. Yeah. How many are male? Oh, not many. Give this kid, his family can't afford this. Give him a good deal.
Right.
And you can get that. But I had the second in the class who missed being first by 1/100th of a grade point average. She could not get a price down below 35,000 a year because she's female. And it's rare to have males in the humanities, but there's plenty of women. So these are the games that are being played. I get it. I mean, they want to get more men, so they give a better deal. But the cost is crazy. I mean, most of the schools over the last 2 decades that my students want to attend tend to be private liberal arts schools that are going to take them from where they are and be able to take them further. And most of those schools start at $60,000 to $65,000.
Yeah.
And then if they're, if they've got at all a decent GPA, they give, oh, you got the presidential scholarship, $10,000 off. So now it's 55. Okay, so how is $200,000 better than $240,000 for at that price? Now, but would 60,000 be a lot better than 100,000? Now we're starting to get into realms where most middle-class people are going, okay, now you got my attention. So what the micro college phenomena has already started doing is they've dropped college prices.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a year of college at St. Andrews, yes, we're new. Yes, we'll probably have to adjust things as we go, but we're pegged pretty closely with most of the other micro colleges that have actually started. There's another 2, 3 starting next fall. So this is a whole thing. This is a pushback against everything we're talking about. So we're at $16,500 for tuition, room, and board. Now,
to put that in perspective for our audience who maybe haven't had kids in college recently, in our phone conversation yesterday, I mentioned that was less than my tuition alone in the early 90s was at Thomas Aquinas College. My tuition was around $20,000 a year in 1992 at Thomas Aquinas. So that's really incredible. So what would be your elevator pitch to a parent who's maybe somewhat skeptical about a liberal arts humanities degree?
Well, if you've got an hour and a half, go to our website and look up our summer dialogues and discussions from early this summer. And I actually led this discussion on where
I'll make sure to provide the link, by the way.
Okay, where can a liberal arts degree get you? Because being an English major in undergrad myself, everyone, 100% of the time, for every year I was there, would say, oh, you're an English major, oh, you want to teach. And of course, at the time, no, I want to write. I don't want to teach, shut up, leave me alone. And of course, in God's sense of humor, I actually did pick up a couple of writing gigs right out of graduation from university. And I want to say within 2 months, and I shopped around my resume to substitute teach to kind of, help the struggling writer earn some money. And I think by middle to the end of January, I was teaching half-time in a private Christian school and suddenly discovered, wow, I love this. It's fantastic. And I'm not half bad at it. So, maybe I can keep going down that. And so I've been teaching in one classroom or next. Sometimes the classroom's out, in the mall in DC. We do a big travel program at St. Andrews. And in fact, this next year, we're anticipating taking the trip that was planned for March 19 of 2020. I think the skies closed March 17. And so the goal is, I haven't laid it in stone, but I've already talked with Croatia and England, and they know we're planning on coming. And so late May through early June, we'll be in the Midlands doing a double pilgrimage between Chester Cathedral and Lichfield Cathedral. And then we're going to fly over to Croatia and basically do some missions work with a number of new parishes being founded, mission parishes all over. And there's a ministry to the Roma people in that country as well that one of our priests deals with. And so we were all ramped up and ready to go, and then COVID hit. So we're gonna try to do that trip at the end of this next school year.
Sounds
so
great.
Again, rabbit trails everywhere.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So, but what more specifically, I was looking to for the objection. It's like the parent who's just thinks that it's not practical. Like, what would be?
I didn't answer.
What would you say to that person about the value of the kind of education that you're offering your students?
Small anecdote. I'm in a pub on the Central Coast with my brother-in-law having a beer, and we're talking about St. Andrew's Academy, which at that time was a little bit young, 5, 6, 7 years into it. And the guy down the bar said, "Hey guys, I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. You're running a classical school." I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I just graduated. I believe it was St. Mary's East Bay, and they had a great books program." Now, I would bet you bucks they don't have it anymore. These schools tend to develop these great books program, and they're so great, and everyone loves them so much that I think the rest of the faculty feel threatened and they shut them down.
Oh.
I don't know what's really going on there, but this is consistently happening. And I said, "Well, so you got a great books education?" She says, "Yeah, loved it. Amazing. So you know, reading all these great texts and having great, oh yeah, yeah. So what do you do now?" "Oh, I own a software engineering company." And most people don't put that together.
Right.
I said, "So, wow, so you came out with a classics degree and now you're running a software company. How does that work?" And he says, "Well, I learned how to learn.
Yep.
I mean, I can learn whatever I want to learn. So I was interested in software. I learned it, hired some people. We started doing business." And that's the key, is that your skill set coming out of a liberal arts degree is you know how to think. You know how to communicate, written and orally. You know how to problem solve. And, you know, on that video, on that discussion, we talked a lot about the whole front end was, and I was using C.S. Lewis. I just kind of stuck with him all the way through to be consistent. But basically, a liberal arts education is designed to make you free, not in the definition of freedom as you mentioned earlier,
Right.
but in the classic definition. And at the end, I got practical. I said, "Look, you're going to come out with a set of skills that can take you anywhere you want to go. And just take the skills that you already have, and, you know, not about learning something new, but just what you have. Communications director at a corporation. You can deal with marketing if that's your thing. It's not that fun. You can take those communication skills, and every corporation needs someone that knows how to write, that knows how to communicate. It can, yeah, I mean, it goes kind of sideways into everywhere. There's not a business out there that doesn't need the skill set that someone with a liberal arts degree has. And that ability to think clearly and to analyze and problem solve is, I just think, huge. And it's what we don't have. I mean, I'll be honest with you, for years, my students picked up a local job their junior or senior year. Or, I mean, it's hard for my students to do much work during school because they're working pretty hard at school. That's their vocation. But in the summers, they pick up jobs, and I mean, traditionally, not always. I mean, we don't have a perfect set of students, but just this summer, one of my graduates is working for a local cafe, and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And the owner said, "How many more do you have? I'll take as many as you have." I mean, I'm dealing with people that come to work hard. I'm dealing with people that can't think through a simple sentence. She just has common sense. That alone makes her valuable. I'll work her as much as she wants to be worked. And that's just not unusual for someone who has this kind of training. And there's also something hard to pin down in words, but I see it on the athletic field. We've done a lot of soccer with our middle school students or high school students, and none of them are like, "Oh man, soccer's my life. What am I going to do if I can't play soccer?" They all enjoy it. Some really enjoy it. Some are like, "Well, it's fun. We'll get out and play." And we consistently win. I'm like, why are we winning? I'm coaching. I don't know what I'm doing. And I realized, oh, these kids know how to work together. They know how to listen. They know how to communicate. And you can give them direction and they'll actually know, okay, that's the plan. Let's go execute that. And I realized, no, and also they know how to work hard. So when they're out on the field, they're busting their rear end because that's what's required. So they run harder, they run longer, they work together better. And I just thought, just at the basic level of it, really low level rec sports stuff, that makes a difference.
Right.
So those are the things that I've seen that a classical education, that a liberal arts type of education will give you. There's all sorts of these hard to categorize intuitional type things that come out of it, that are the fruit of that type of study.
What you're talking about, that can actually matter even at higher levels of competition too, because
Sure.
one of the things in my background, you might see my Sooners fan. I'm a big Oklahoma Sooners fan. Oklahoma had a nightmare of a time with Army a couple years ago. and military academies have a long history of playing very good teams much tougher than you would expect based on the talent level. And that's part of what you're talking about, just that dedication, that self-discipline, that matters.
And now we're touching on what are traditionally called virtues.
Right.
They might matter. Our culture
You
doesn't
think?
matter at all. And I would say that these last couple of decades, I've grown tremendously as a teacher. I've made, my biggest mistakes, because give me enough time, I'll make them. But I've also realized that our kids going into this world do not have the tool set they need, particularly Christian kids, do not have the tool set they need to encounter the culture we're facing right now. And so I have worked hard the last decade in particular to pursue virtue training, I suppose, but intellectually in the classroom. What is this stuff? What was, Plato and Aristotle, what were they talking about? How does the scripture see this? N.T. Wright makes a pretty good argument. I think he's right, that St. Paul, in Christ, all things are made new. And St. Paul makes the argument, he argues, that the classical virtues are made new as well. Because there's 4 cardinal virtues and 3 theological, right? But the cardinal virtues, we get into, let's take Homer's Iliad.
Yeah.
And you've got a little problem between some pretty big characters. And Achilles is just ticked. Everyone took my prizes. I'm upset. I'm going to go sit and pout. And nothing is going to change that for him. And no one can actually get humble, because out of all the virtues that are good virtues, the 4 cardinal, what are they? So justice, courage, wisdom, and disciplines, self-control. Those don't get you humility. In fact, this is reason why Christ is completely just like, who are you? The Greeks are going, what? Because Christ's virtue is love.
Right.
And St. Paul says, I would argue that St. Paul basically is saying, love makes the other virtues catch on fire. I mean, they really work when love's handmaid is humility. And so to lower your pride, I mean, the pride of the Greek warrior, that was everything. I mean, that was what he had. His great goal was to end his life in as close to immortality as he could get by being remembered in song. So I'm not going to lower my pride. That's my goal in life, is to be more proud and to have something to be proud of. And Jesus comes and turns the whole world upside down. And so that discussion in class just brings up all these wonderful discussions about how do we live our lives this way. I mean, Christians, I think, have thought for a long time in our current culture that, well, you know, these stories are nice to read, they're fun, but I mean, we just need to read the Bible to learn how to live. So we usually have a discussion every once in a while, particularly when I'm dealing with the classics, like, so this is not the Bible, right? Well, no, it's not the Bible. Well, can you learn from it? Well, yeah, probably. I mean, we can learn, you know, that maybe pride is a sin, right? I mean, we can learn that. I said, yeah, but do you think that classical literature can, I mean, the scriptures are told, we are told that the scriptures can transform us through the Holy Spirit's working through Holy Scripture. Can the same happen through classical literature, through Homer, Virgil? And they have to go, whoa, wait a minute. I've never heard my pastor preach on this.
Mm.
But the older students are usually like, yeah, of course, I think I've been transformed. I think wow, no, think about it. It's totally. I said, now, the scriptures don't tell us that Homer's going to transform us. So this is not like some guarantee that if we study it, but I would almost give you the guarantee, if you study it well, and you're thoughtful, and maybe even prayerful about what you can learn about this ancient culture, you can be transformed even by literature. God can
Absolutely.
anything. Yeah. But
the word is connected to all words if you're looking in the right way.
And all truth is God's truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So just this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you. I just want to give you a chance to make a last pitch as to why you think parents should consider St. Andrew's College for their students.
Okay. Kind of looking at some notes that I wrote down. 250 years ago, Thomas Jefferson said of America that ours are the only farmers who can read Homer. You've probably heard that quote. It's a great quote. 50 years ago, C.S. Lewis, speaking of the Western world, said, "We have lived to see the second death of ancient learning. If one were looking for a man who could not read Virgil, though his father could, he might be found more easily in the 20th century than the 5th.
Yeah.
We aim to reverse that trend. Whether or not you think that's important is probably a different discussion, and one that we've been having. And we want to reverse that trend for the few that have the courage, the temerity, the tenacity to engage themselves in this fight for civilization that's going on right now. Like, we've been listening to prophets for 100, 200 years that have said, look, we've got problems approaching. Hey, this is a problem. If this continues, we're going to see some serious problems. I think what I've realized in this last 6 months is it's now. We are now that prophecy. We're living in the midst of Lewis's concerns, Chesterton's concerns, even de Tocqueville, You go further back, and these guys are saying that this over here, like if this continues, this could be a problem. We should not do this. And here we are, right where they said we'd be. This is an age. This is an age of dragons. We live in an age of dragons. So following on kind of an awkward Chesterton quote, I'm not quite sure if it's a quote exactly. We need to raise dragon slayers. And the fight is now. And this next generation, they need to be trained because it's they. I'm going to forget the name of the author. I quoted him a while back. He was doing a keynote address, or not a keynote, a commencement address at a college, Kenyon College, maybe 15 years ago. Oh my gosh, his name's going to escape me. Forgive me. He tells the story right at the beginning. He says, well, these two fish are swimming along, and an older fish comes by and says, hey, boys, how you doing? How's the water? And they keep swimming on, and 5 minutes later, the one fish stops, looks at the other, and says, what the hell's water?
Mm-hmm.
Our young people are in the water,
Right.
and they can't even tell what they're looking at. They they need an education that would give them a little bit of perspective, a little bit of objectivity, so they can see the water. I mean, our generation grew up in modernity, and I mean, it's a fight to recognize it in ourselves. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's well, that's very much a modern perspective. I don't think that's a biblical perspective.
Right.
And it's hard because it's the water you swim in.
Correct.
Well, the water's gotten very dangerous. It's gotten crazy, very turbulent, but no one notices anything different when they're 15, 18, 22 in this culture, because that's all they've known their whole life. So St. Andrew's is about giving them some objectivity, showing them where the fight really is. Hopefully, modeling, and none of us are perfect, but modeling the kind of discussion that can say, hey, wait a minute, do we just take that for granted? Or can we question what's going on here? Can we get some objectivity to say, well, what does this mean? And a little bit of history to say, well, where have we come from? And who am I really if I go back beyond my 20 years or my 15 years or whatever? What's the world like? So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Obviously, we're glad to talk with whomever. We are, as I mentioned to you, we just kind of got this thing rolling in the spring, and we thought, well, that's not enough time to get a cohort, but God's a big God. Maybe we'll have a small cohort by fall of 2022. So we're at the tail end of that. We've got a little bit of formation, but nothing solid yet. But if there's interest, please get a hold of Emily. She's listed on our website. The dialogues and discussions have lots of information that can give at least a window, a picture into the kind of thing that we're doing. I mean, a Zoom classroom is not a real classroom, so it's hard. But we thought, well, that's better than nothing. So please feel free to get a hold of us, ask questions. I realize that there might be non-Anglicans who will go, well, what's that all about? Well, that's a whole nother discussion, and we're glad to have it. No, you don't have to be Anglican. You don't even have to be a Christian to attend this school. But you'll hear a lot.
I was not a Christian when I attended Thomas Aquinas College. I was an agnostic. And actually, part of my conversion process, my long conversion process, was an old Jesuit at Thomas Aquinas College, who, when I was introduced to him, looked me in the eye and said, oh, Nathan, you're the one who thinks he's an agnostic. And of course, I was irritated by the comment at the time, but it haunted me, and it set me on a course of reading a bunch of Lewis and a bunch of Chesterton. And
oh, interesting. It's like Jean Valjean, right?
What was that?
It's like Jean Valjean and Les Miserables.
Yeah.
Bishop said, you forgot I gave you the candlesticks too. Take it all.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it was he was a very wise and insightful elderly Jesuit.
That's a great story.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Father Foos.
Well, thank you for
I'll
the-
make sure to get this out there as soon as possible, and hopefully it will generate some interest. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for joining me
Appreciate it
on Grail
very much.
Country.